So the title of the book is Gathering, and I stole this word. I stole it before in 1991 from Homi Baba. So those of you who are familiar with Mr. Baba and his theoretical work would recall Gathering. Well, I took it because I was trying to name an exhibition that I was putting together at Griffith University of Australian Art. And I'll read from what was the catalog. This was an effort to explain why I stole the word. So, gathering, it's not collecting, it's not amassing, it's not foreclosing, it's not harvesting, not a lusting after, not a social gathering, the bourgeois institution, not the creation of a defined collective. Rather, it might be a summoning up of energy, of thoughts, of wits, with meditativeness, but also urgency. I gather that in quotations is not the same as I know. It might be a receiving of additions, the creation of mass, although perhaps not quite bricolage. Yet it might be a keenness towards concealed knowledges, that I'm very interested in concealed knowledges. Two, there is a death, as when one is gathered up to one's ancestors, whoever they may be. A storm gathers, like an ominous swelling, or a momentum with no clear trajectory, possibilities in the charged chemistry of a site. Includes making, gathering is to draw together folds and wrinkles. In bookbinding, it is to take a group of leaves, imagining and insisting on an order. The same word has female and male inflections, neither of which is essentially liberating or essentially oppressive. Gather carries only a spectral recollection of gathering as cosmology, hunter gatherer. Yet gathering seems to be always vis a vis a threat. Gather the clothes. A storm is gathering. I'll end there.
Thank you, Marian. Thank you. At least to my perspective, you've done a lot of different things with your professional careers and with your energies. So maybe you could explain how writing has worked in tandem with or cohabited with those different other practices of yours.
Well, I write.
Mhm.
I am an independent curator. I have made museums and exhibitions in different parts of the world, in different parts of the Philippines. I do. I am a partner in a think tank, so we do policy work, and I am very politically active. So there's a lot of political work in my life. When I think about all of this simultaneously, I realize that as a curator, I have to find a way outside text because writing is text. Curatorship is space, and you can't privilege text as you deal with the physicality of space. So that's changing now, but spatial comprehension remains a rather important part of curatorship. Now, policy work is a projection into the future. It's an imagining of a space in the future, a space in which life can transpire. So that's different from text. That's actually like a kind of wishful thinking, which is what policy work is. So the first thing I'll have to say about the relationship of writing to the other things that I'm doing is that I'm very conscious that I don't want to privilege text in the same way that I don't want to privilege text because I would like to give due honor to oral cultures, non-literate cultures. So there's that. But since all these areas of work, curatorship, policy work, political work, they all require a critical imagination. And the infrastructure of critical thought, the implicatedness of work today, in criticism with work in the past, in criticism, is text. And in this respect, resisting text is absurd. So I might say this, and this will sound heavily theoretical to you, but it really is not. What I have found productive is the struggle itself to figure out these matters, not once and for all, but repetitively for every project. What is the relationship with text and this space? What is the relationship of text with this particular policy area, which has to do with the lives of very poor people, for example? So it gets rerun. It gets rerun. This trying to figure out the relationship with shifts. So in sum, all this means, and in practical terms, all this means is that the privileging of text to me must be resisted by myself, perhaps not other people, and that the absurdity of it must be made productive.
I mean, I think that's part of the pleasure or like joy that one experiences in, and I think this is what Rustam is really, one thing that he's really pointing to is that because you don't, I mean, I don't necessarily see this as, I mean, I think what you do that's interesting is you bridge orality and the written word without, like, you know, even for myself, like, I don't talk the way I write, you know.
Yeah.
There's a much bigger, like, this kind of Western education where we really learn to write in a voice that is not our spoken voice. So for me, and I think this is what Rustam makes the point of, is that you really collapse the two in a way that is very, very engaging and pleasurable, because it just gives you access, like, you feel in closer proximity to you as the writer, because it's this voice that is coming from a place that is, you know, in a way closer to your actual person, you know, rather than the sort of formality of a lot of, especially more academic or more, you know, the kinds of texts that accompany a lot of cultural activities or, you know, museums. Or so for me, that's a certain kind of pleasure.
Well, there's pleasure for me, and there's pleasure in language. I might also add that you mentioned that I also talk to myself, and there are many selves in each of us. So I'm not certainly privileging my own positionality in my own culture, but the reason I decided to write one essay where I talk to different selves is because those different selves have different languages, and they do talk to each other, and I'm sure you recognize that. But that's fun.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously created these. I almost didn't want to give it away, but I mean, there are these, and it is very playful. Like, you know, the many sides of, and the many incarnations of yourself, and, you know, the way that your friends can recognize them and appreciate them and see them as distinct. You know, I think is a very developed and nuanced sense of self, or and cultivation of self. That on the one hand, you know, at first might strike someone as, you know, from the outside, yeah, but it's absolutely, you know, but then it sounds wonderful, and you start thinking, well, you know, yeah, sure, I do the same thing. I'm one person with, you know, this group of people, and I'm another person in a different context or in a different professional role, and, you know, so why not embrace these multiple selves and voices that we all carry around?
Well, I'd like to jump in and say that I've began to theorize it over the last perhaps decade, that identity itself, and, you know, identity politics tends to kind of spiral downwards into some original self or some more authentic self than the other selves. But then, in fact, as it plays out in human lives, there is so much negotiation between and among different selves. And I do find that the politics itself of identity will privilege oneself over another self depending on the circumstances and um, methods of empowerment and self-empowerment.
Right. Do you think then you would answer this question about whether or not over time your thoughts about certain topics have kind of
Ah,
evolved,
hmm,
or I guess what I'm trying to ask is whether you think, or whether you noticed in the course of
yes,
gathering text together, whether you saw them as an evolution of topics or just more of like a deeper exploration of them over time. Was there?
definitely
Yeah.
not an evolution,
Mhm.
a kind of rupture, and yeah, about criticality. Of course, when you're young, and I was young in the 70s and in the 80s, and you study your positions and you develop your arguments. Mm, and I fell into the trap of figuring an ethical way forward into a text or into a curatorial project or into a political project with the need to determine what you think might be destructive and avoided or renounced, denounced, rejected, embraced. You make up you make those decisions in criticism. Uh, I hadn't realized until much later how dualistic, how binary that is. I have a deeper appreciation of the folly of that kind of dualism. It is biblical, and in many senses, that kind of Manichaean dyad from the Abrahamic religions, obviously to which I was born, has to be outgrown, I think. So, how did I outgrow it? About 15 years ago, I began to take Deleuze seriously. A particular line, uh, lines of light, the Deleuzian lines of light. And I began to recognize the ethical need in criticism to look at a desolate landscape, a malignant landscape, and to try hard to find lines of light. Because if you see things as black and white or east and west, then um, it's not rigorous enough. It's not strategically good, and it doesn't exercise what needs to be exercised when you come to actual political engagement. So yes, to find the subtlest traces that might embody uh, potential the potential or the possibility of emancipation may be nearly invisible, but we need to find those in every malignant situation and to find in any situation that looks happy um, the, the things that may be unhappy in them. So I've changed in that respect. There's another way, and it's related, that I've changed. And so it's a rupture again. Um, from that binary positionality. And I'm by no means talking about being things being all relative. Of course, I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about, for example, the book Empire by Negri and Hart. I'm sure you're familiar with it. I find the two authors to be overly romantic, but I did get something from them that I have actually taken as a life lesson, which is that there is no outside position. There's no outside position. We are in empire. It has no center. It's deterritorialized. The flows are here, there, and everywhere, especially now. And and you do not have an outside. And you'll just have to figure out your critique as embedded within it. That's a fundamental change in the way I've been thinking, and it happened about 15 years ago.